Welcome and thanks for joining us. The cloud. We know what it is and we know what it's supposed to do. But in addition to the many advantages, the cloud comes with problems. And in an era when most of us and most everything is in the cloud somehow, the number of threats, risk, and other problems multiply daily, especially for government agencies and private companies working with them. My guests today are Jonathan Fibus. He's the Chief Information Security Officer with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Andre Mendez, he's the CIO, the Chief Information Officer at the International Trade Administration Bureau, Department of Commerce. Katie Lewin, Federal Director, Cloud Security Alliance. And Ned Miller, he's the Public Sector Business Unit Sales Executive for mVision Cloud at McAfee. Thanks for being with us, and I'd first like to start off with you, Jonathan. Would you just put in context what we're facing now, not to scare anyone, but just put into context what we're looking at now when we talk about cloud security?
When we talk about cloud security, we're talking about all of the agency's data that they use that we use to conduct our mission, and we want to make sure that that data is protected appropriately for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. To do that, we go through a number of processes that the National Institutes for Standards and Technology have outlined for us to classify our data, to ensure that we are protecting it appropriately. And it's easy to do that when you're holding on to the data in your own data center, in your own computers, at your own locations. When you send it out to the cloud, you have to be a little more trusting. So you have to understand what controls are in place in the cloud, what controls do I need to have in place when I get my data from my location to the cloud, and how do I ensure that my data is appropriately protected and I can ensure that it's managed appropriately.
And that's precisely where I wanted to go with this. This is all about control. The number of apps that are out there, to achieve that control, the process that's out there, also the culture of the control process. It's a new business process, as it's been explained to me as I've researched this. So I'm looking for some answers on a number of questions regarding what are the best practices for maintaining cloud security for your organizations, and what are the latest tools that are out there. And Andre, I want to go to you to see what your thoughts are on that couple of questions there. Talk to us about the best practices and tools that are out there to achieve what you see as necessary from the beginning of any kind of control process when it comes to cloud security.
So I come from a slightly different perspective. My bureau, the International Trade Administration Bureau, is actually the only agency/bureau that is 100% cloud already. And so for us, we had to make a substantial number of decisions over the last couple of years to make sure that we're doing the right thing. But philosophically, we have come to the conclusion that the security posture that vendors whose entire business line depends on the security of their cloud operations and their FedRAMP certification are far better equipped than any particular agency or bureau to really bring to the table the best set of tools, the best set of practices, the best set of individuals, because for them, breaches can spell disaster, absolute disaster. As you can imagine, security professionals are very expensive and difficult to hire these days because there's such huge demand. And I felt like this at my previous agency, at the Broadcasting Board of Governors, and I feel like that at the ITA, where there's no way that I could ever compete for the talent that I would need in order to really secure my organization's assets to the utmost. And so we are big proponents of the FedRAMP certification. We've actually helped a couple of vendors go through FedRAMP certification and got them certified. But when it comes down to securing the data of my bureau/agency, I am going to believe that the people whose livelihood depends on it are going to be far better equipped than I am.
That's a very interesting point you bring up, Andre, because not long ago I was talking with the Deputy Supreme Allied Commander of NATO Transformation, which is based in Norfolk, Virginia, Admiral Manfred Nielsen is his name. And he said the exact same thing. NATO's biggest problem is data security. And their second biggest problem is competing for the talent that's necessary to do what they need done, looking out at the future. So they're faced with a situation where they're not quite sure how they're going to manage or to get there. So Katie, I'd like to go to you to see what your thoughts are on exactly that problem. You know what needs to be done. You know, in some ways, how it needs to be done, but then getting the folks to make sure it's done the way that it's necessary to make sure that it's being done properly is really difficult. So what's your approach?
So I was the first director of FedRAMP. So I worked at GSA, but I worked closely with Vivek Kundra, who was the first federal CIO. And we did FedRAMP. We set up the infrastructure of FedRAMP with 3 government employees and 10 contractors. That's all we had. Then we had volunteer help from the CISO community. They really helped us go through the controls that are listed in FISMA and that are they picked the ones that they thought were most applicable to ensuring security of applications in the cloud. So I think that the recruitment thing that you could say to young people who are security professionals is, if you're in the government, you get to do cool stuff. I mean, contractors execute the cool stuff, but you are the ones who begin the policy, begin the environment to allow those kinds of things to grow and mature. So we are never probably in the federal government going to turn over the answer to the question, what should we do next? We might ask for advice from the private sector, but in the federal sector, they're the ones who are basically the ones who are, setting the tone. So in a way, I think that maybe my example is a good one. I went back and forth between private sector and government. That's a really fun thing to do, and it really gives you exposure on both sides. But the government sets the tone. The private sector can bring the technical, managerial, security expertise to that problem, but really it's the government's choice or job to define the problem.
And how would you characterize the success or lack thereof in doing that these days?
Well, I'm not in the government anymore, but
yeah, I know, but
yeah,
I'm interested because you're not in the government.
Right.
I'm interested because I think you would probably give us a very candid answer.
My reputation precedes me. Yes, I will give you a candid answer. I think that what has been said earlier, that it's hard to recruit and attract the people who have the right experience to be government employees is difficult. However, this is maybe a little off the track, but because the pension system has changed, all right? So in the past, there was a big incentive for people to stay in the government forever because you were guaranteed a pension. Now it's more a 401k idea and you can go in and out. In my opinion, that should be something that should be promulgated to potential candidates, that you can see issues from both sides, which is extremely helpful and actually valuable to both members or both sides of the table.
Mm-hmm. Getting back to the crux of the cloud security issue and to one of the people that I've found in conversating with you to be just a very good, clear-minded, clear-eyed professional when it comes to talking about these things. And it's not just the easy questions, but the difficult ones too. Ned, I want to ask you, how's this going? That's the first question I want to ask you. How is this going? And secondly, then I want to get your thoughts on what agencies need to consider before getting into the cloud, putting their systems into the cloud. But first, how are things now?
Sure. So JJ, from my perspective, and I've been a student of FedRAMP since 2009. Katie and I were just talking about it. It's been a decade since the FedRAMP initiative has been launched. I would submit that based on my interaction with a number of agencies that we're about halfway where we'd like to be ultimately. So making steady, reasonable progress, but there's still a lot of work to do on the federal civilian side. On the federal DoD side, as it relates to cloud, they had talked about moving to the cloud actually first, but they're laggards in terms of execution. So DoD is just getting started in terms of their overall clouds investment strategy going forward.
Now, is that a problem, just getting started?
It is. There's a number of issues aside from the classic ones that the industry likes to talk about. So we all talk about the cybersecurity barriers to entry as it relates to moving to the cloud and trust. Data security is another major impact. But we can work our way through those because, as we've talked about on the panel, NIST has provided some guidance with respect to the how-to. It's usually what we refer to as the layer 8, the politics, the policies and the decision makers that have to overcome some of the existing policies that exist with respect to things like automation. We've talked about the workforce as an example and having a number of skilled resources to be able to manage into this new cloud frontier, if you will. The reality is automation will play a key position in this overall. And as a result, some of the existing policies are going to have to change. So we're going to have to begin to trust the automation because we will never scale in terms of the number of workforce resources we need to manage and secure all of the new technology that's coming to the forefront.
Now, Jonathan, the question that we've been kind of getting at here is how things are going, and he mentioned something regarding the process of getting started late, as he mentioned about DoD. How do you catch up if you're just starting? And is there a catch up? You know, you have that in 401k where you can put in a little something extra to catch up, but can you do that when you're talking about cloud security?
Well, you have to start looking for the quick wins, the things that are already public facing, the things that have less of an impact on the overall agency security posture. And then you have the bigger wins, which require a lot more movement, like the commodity processes, things like email, productivity suites, the bulk data that's going to be out there that you can't really say all of this is going to be very low risk or very high risk. It falls somewhere in the middle. And you just have to pull the Band-Aid off and start moving things.
Just bite the bullet and get going. So that question that we asked Ned, I want to ask you as well. What do agencies need to consider before putting their systems in the cloud? We talk about control and we talk about the fact that it's essentially absent. You don't see it necessarily, which suggests that it's absent, but it's there. But what do you do? What do you talk about before going to the cloud?
So there's a wonderful FedRAMP repository of what systems have already been authorized. The Joint Authorization Board, which is Department of Homeland Security, GSA, and DoD, really do a fantastic job of giving their provisional authorizations so that you have a very good idea of how that data is being managed in the cloud. We have also at the NRC worked closely with other agencies that have sponsored FedRAMP authorizations, and we are aware of how they secure their data, how they treat their data, and we are comfortable moving our data to those environments because we know how those agencies are going to protect things.
Sorry, go ahead.
That also gives us the ability to focus more on our big requirements, getting the data to the cloud, and making sure that our endpoints are secure, because it's really difficult to move all your endpoints to the cloud. And that's where we need to focus our activities.
Andre.
You know, one thing I've always found interesting is that I've been a huge proponent of moving to the cloud as fast as possible, back to about 2010 when we started with my previous agency. And we were the first ones to use Office 365 and really started that, you know, a lot of those trends. We talk about security in the cloud, but here's the reality. The major exposures that we have from a security standpoint, at the end of the day, tend to come from 4 different items, right? One is, phishing, human phishing, password compromise. The second one is lack of discipline in really patching systems and leaving holes open literally for years, okay? The third one is insider threats, right? Where you can have all the security in the world and then you give permissions to somebody who's a rogue agent and Snowden's gonna happen, right? And many others like that. And then the fourth one is a denial of service type of situation where, yeah, okay, your systems have not been compromised, but you can't offer the functionality, right? And as far as I'm concerned, those really represent the bulk of just about everything really bad that has happened, while the other incidents that we are looking for and constantly protecting against tend to represent a much smaller environment. And so the question becomes, are we focusing on the right things, right? Can every agency afford a system like Akamai's Prolexa, for example? Where they can scale to terabit on denial of services before your services are affected? And the answer is probably not. And even if they could, is that a good use of money from the taxpayer standpoint? Mm-hmm. And so I think that we need to focus on really securing the access, let's say, by individuals. One of the things that we are doing is we're deploying a package that elevates permissions and then immediately discontinues them after a certain period of time, right? So that no one individual at any time has access to all the services that they possibly need access to, right? And then scrutiny of our individuals internally. The endpoint question is extremely important.
That's a very interesting point, and I'm going to come back to that in just a few moments, because the attitudes of people that have access to systems and the discipline that you talked about, we want to get into that. I'm your moderator, JJ Green, on the panel discussion, Innovation in Government, Cyber Leaders on Cloud Security, sponsored by Carahsoft on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network.